which are only available to the audience tonight. One of them is actually just out through this door and in the corner where the light is. And just watch your step because the outside light has blown, so it's a dark corridor. But if you prefer a lighted corridor, go to the counter, and behind the counter there's a set of stairs upstairs and along the corridor to the right, and that's where the other toilet is. So the one at the very end of the corridor is one that you can use. So as I mentioned to most people before the event, we're under COVID rules at the moment where unless you're eating and drinking seated, you have to wear your mask. So once you've finished your drink, if you can pop your mask back on, just makes everybody safe in the space. We know that eventually we're going to be getting cases up here, but we're enjoying this moment where we are one of the only people that are allowed out and about. So let's try and keep it as long as possible, which would be great. And I think that's all the housekeeping that I had to do. Oh, just that the book of the moment, the Honey of Australian Native Bees, is front and centre at the counter. So that's where you can purchase one afterwards. And we're going to get Dean to his seat at the front of the store for signing afterwards. So after the event, we're going to get Dean out first, and then you can mob him with your copies of the book at the front where you can chat a bit further at the signing table. So thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I'd like to start the evening by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. In this area, the Yagara and the Turrbal people. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And because we have quite a large Zoom audience with us tonight, I'd like to pay my respect to the elders of all the places that we're Zooming out to tonight. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. So I'm pretty sure that the Aboriginal people of Australia knew a lot about the native bees. I think that we're probably newcomers in this game, but it's really exciting to be here tonight to hear a little bit more. I know that I was here when Tim Hurd launched his book here at Avid Reader, and we have Tim here to be our conversation person tonight. Tim's book has been reprinted so many times now, I think I've lost count, and has changed format a little bit and has become a massive bestseller right across Australia. So hopefully we can do the same thing with your book, Tim. So Tim, after completing a PhD in pollination biology, Tim worked as a research scientist for CSIRO from 1990 to 2014. His roles included team leader and manager of Mexican Field Station. Tim's interests centre around the Stingless bees taxonomic group. He has been involved in many aspects of research, from pure studies on their basic biology to applied work on their utilisation for economic purposes. Tim works across disciplines to allow questions such as how to utilise stingless bees for crop pollination. Tim has published more than 140 research papers and popular articles, including 70 on bees and pollination. He is the author of the best-selling The Australian Native Bee book, which is also at the counter tonight. If you don't have one already, many people do. And that has won 3 major awards, including the Whiteley Award, the Australian Book Industry Award, and the Apammonia Book Award. So everybody please welcome Tim Hurd. And just before I introduce Dean, I did forget to mention that you can ask questions at the end of the event if we have time. And for those of you on Zoom, you need to type them into the chat function, and that chat function will be shown to you as we sneakily put a link to the book where you can purchase the book. And that's where you type in your questions at any time during the event, and I will be texted them from inside. Very technical setup out here. So Tim will be speaking to Dean, and Dean comes from a long lineage of farmers, but the farm life was not for him. He studied and became a scientist in biotechnology, where he has worked for many years. Arriving in Brisbane about 15 years ago, he discovered and then fell in love with our native stingless bees. Dean helped found the Brisbane Native Beekeepers Club 5 years ago, which later grew to become a National Native Bee Association. Dean has helped to organise 2 Australian Native Bee conferences, is the current chair of the Brisbane branch of ANBA and the chair of ANBA Honey Committee. He loves to be involved with the community and to help people discover the joys of bees. Everybody welcome Dean.
Thank you very much, Christy. and to Abbott for having us here tonight. And thank you all for coming. It's my huge pleasure to be here in conversation with Dean, my old mate Dean, who we worked together on many projects over the last few years, and of course we're here to talk about his new book. But first, I would like to ask Dean to tell us a bit about himself, about how you came to bees, your long journey coming to where you are today. Before we dive into your book.
That one wasn't on the script, Tim. I'm a farmer's son. I've got a mother from Brewarrina, New South Wales. My father's from Goulburn, New South Wales. Always grown up with bugs and bees, and I was that awkward kid that the teachers didn't like because I wasn't out there playing football. I did play football because you got to, but no, I was often in trouble with the teachers, and they even told on me to my parents. Dean's out there looking at bugs. Something wrong with him. So that's not a problem. You can find other people that are interested in these things in the big cities, so that's okay. I went on to study science at school, and they said, well, you're either going to be a scientist or you're going to be a writer or you're going to be into language, because I really liked the German when I was a kid at school as well. I had uncles from my mum's place, and they used to talk about the native bees. So my Uncle Johnny, my Uncle Peter, Uncle Gerald and various other people. But Gerald, I don't think, talked about bees. It was Johnny most of all, sitting out at the bridge of the Barwon River. And we'd talk about bees for ages. And every newspaper or magazine or little piece of paper, I had all these pictures of beehives, 7, 8, 9, 10 stories high with bees, clouds of bees coming out of them. When I was a kid, Dad was a shearer. He'll still shear a few now, but he's into his 70s. He's slowed down a bit. He retired about 10 times, I think. But there was one time when Dad went out shearing, and I'm not real sure, but he had all these different things in the back of the truck. I kind of think that maybe they didn't have enough money to pay him, and said, is there anything here that you want? He brought home a beehive, empty beehive. So I said, oh, geez, what have you got there, Dad? I was about 10 years old. And he said, oh, a beehive. We'll go out and we'll cut a tree down the forest and we'll put some bees in it. That'll be fun. So, yeah, he had a veil. I had a piece of mosquito netting which went over my hat. Many years later, when I was in university, I used to come home, and every time I was home, Dad would be going, jump on the motorbike there, son. Let's go and chase some cattle. We've got to get those cattle in. I've been keeping them for you. I know how you like it, marking all the bull calves and that sort of stuff. So, mostly we'd be out chasing cattle, but sometimes Dad would be off shearing. So that's the times when I'd have a chance to actually get into the beehives. So I was in one of those beehives once, and I got 30 or 40 stings. I came up in hives. That's fitting, isn't it? Hives, working in a beehive. And I was having a bit of a reaction, so we called through to the hospital, and I swallowed a few antihistamines and that sort of thing, and Dad arrived home at that stage and took me into the hospital, and a little bit of adrenaline, and that wasn't too bad. But I wasn't so keen on the stinging bees after that. So when I come up here to Brisbane, I found what I was sure was pretty much the only stingless beehive. It was in a rotting log that needed to get bees out of it. So I thought, I could go in just about anything, plastic Tupperware box or an old pot. I didn't really know. So I started looking online on the internet, and I found Tim Hurd. So got in contact with him. I think I need one of these boxes. And he said, oh, you should, what do you got? And I said, well, I've got this rotting old tree. And he goes, oh, yeah, okay. I've got this, I've got this seminar that I'm doing. I'm showing some people how to put bees in a box. So come on over, bring your log, and we'll put them in there together. And I thought, geez, that's pretty good. And, Tim and I have been friends not exactly since that day. It was a few years on. But yeah, no, we've been friends since then. I learnt a lot when I went to his seminar, and I've been learning about bees ever since then. Yeah, thanks.
Well, for something that was off the script, you did pretty well, Dan. That's a good start. No, that was amazing. That was a beautiful insight into your journey. But we're mostly here to hear about your book, your creation, the honey of native stingless bees. So this is not the honey of any old bee, not the honey of the European honeybee, but of this very specific group of Australian native bees that also produce honey. So, a book about honey of stingless bees, it sounds quite specific, but you've managed to pack a lot of breadth into that book. So can you tell us a little bit about the flow and the structure of that book? How did you design it? How did you come to what it is?
Yeah, thanks. As you say, it is quite specific, but I didn't want to just make another book all about native bees because well, Tim's written one and it's pretty good. It's pretty comprehensive. It's large. There's other books written by people in other countries, and there's a couple of other authors in Australia. And then every man and his dog has a website, and they're putting all this information out there as well. So there's actually quite a lot of information out there. So I didn't write a book that's just got everything I know about bees in it. There's a lot of stuff that's not in the book. As you say, it is specific. And I did try and make this book related to stingless bee honey. Some of the things in there are because they were quirky things, they were original things that other people haven't covered. So one of the examples of that is the newspaper articles. So a few years back, I did some research when I was looking at a really interesting name in Australian English, and it's sugarbag. So sugarbag can mean the honey, it can mean the bees, it can mean the interaction of the bees, the environment, the flowers they're on, and the honey themselves and where they nest. So all of these things can actually mean sugarbag. Actually, us in this modern day using sugarbag as just a word for the honey of stingless bees isn't quite right. Even just associating with stingless bees isn't quite right, the native bees, because back when that word came about, there were feral European bees out in the bush and there were our bees in the bush, and both of those were actually known as sugarbag. People would go hunting sugarbag. So that's quite interesting. I almost forget the question.
The structure. That was a great start to the question because you talked about the beginning of the book and how you built up this history of the naming. But then how did the rest of the book flow from there?
Yeah, so we were working with the AMBA, so I'm heading the AMBA Honey Committee. So we really started the Australian Native Bee Association, AMBA. It was a group of people that got together and we were discussing honey, and our honey doesn't meet the same specifications in the food standard 2.8.2, by the way, for European honey. It's got too much moisture in it, it tends to ferment, and it doesn't meet the classifications. And some people interpret that as, well, it's illegal to sell it then. We shouldn't sell it. Can't call it honey. And I agree. We can't call it honey and it doesn't match those specifications. So what are you going to do? And we thought, well, we'll get together as a group because Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, I'll just call them FSANs after this, so keep up. So FSANs won't just listen if Tim comes along or I come along and say, hey, we think that we really need to look at this standard for honey and have a look at it to include our bees. So we decided to create a little group, create an organisation. So we actually had something standing behind us to go along to FSANs. And so I started to head up this honey committee and got really good scientists. I've got a couple of people in this crowd here tonight, beekeepers as well. And we started working on the application process. That's almost ready to go in, by the way. It's only taken us about 2 years. But during that process, I said, oh, look, there's really no information out there for our beekeepers, how to handle the honey and how to do things cleanly and what do the state regulators want and, information about labelling and bottling and all these sorts of things. Where can you do it? Can you do it out on top of the hive out in the paddock? Do you need to take it into your kitchen or should it be in some sort of certified facility? All these questions. And I thought, well, I'll just make a little pamphlet. It'll be a little fold-out thing. It'll be about, 3 or 4 pages long, and that'll be pretty good. We'll provide all the information we need. I think that's in one of the sections there. So it actually grew from that. So that was my intention, was to make this pamphlet. Yeah. I thought that won't take long, a few weeks.
And there's more though, Dean. You've got more in your book. So tell us a bit more. How does it flow from there? So one of the things that I was very impressed with is how you engage with a lot of people who are doing very interesting things in the world of stingless beekeeping in terms of extracting honey in various ways. And you've captured that diversity and that inventiveness very well in the book. So tell us a bit about that process.
I guess that's because I like to talk to a lot of people. I like to experiment. So a lot of the people that I like to talk to are also experimenters. They're out on the edge of what they're doing. Some of them have strong views on what we should be doing, and they're very passionate people. So that's something in our industry, is just this passion that you see. So I wanted to bring that into the book as well. Some of that passion from the different beekeepers, and some of them been into it for 20 odd years, a really long time. Others are just people that I knew that had done something interesting, and I thought, well, I'll get their story in there as well. That's interesting. They're me, mate. I'll get them in. But for the beekeeper stories, I actually wrote to just about every beekeeper that was in the original email before we started this AMBA group, and I gave them all an opportunity to get in touch. And unfortunately, there's a couple of very large beekeepers that didn't get in touch and they didn't get into the book. But that's okay. There'll be a second edition one day, so we might pick them up then. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So tell us a bit more about the international aspect, because these bees, we consider them our Australian native bees, but there's relatives. This group of stingless bees, these honey-producing small bees, occur all throughout the world, don't they? And there's other countries that are from which emerging industries of honey production are coming. So did you make contact with those people? Did those overseas industries influence your book at all?
Absolutely, and a fantastic question, by the way. So we've got a very, very much a fledgling industry here in Australia. There's only a few keepers of native bees that have been selling sugarbag or native bee honey or stingless bee honey, whatever you want to call it. I actually devoted a page in the book to, a rose by any other name, she'll still smell as sweet, just because of that diversity of opinions on different names. And then, of course, there's all the native language names as well, which may be in the many hundreds in Australia. And a lot of those names, the knowledge of those names, they still exist out there. So we can learn those. I didn't try and list all those names down, by the way. I just tried to get a little few of those names down just to share between our different people. Internationally, in Brazil, they've got the most amazing designs on their bottles and things that you can see. Everybody's selling this honey, and they've got their viewpoints on how to make the honey. Some of them even put it into special rooms and ferment it. Some of them pasteurize it. The reason is that our honey, being rather liquid, Hope the lid doesn't come off. Look at that. It's something like water, isn't it? So our honey being rather liquid, the yeast and the bacteria can actually ferment it. So that makes it rather special. So a lot of these industries in the other countries have actually come about to try and control that fermentation process because it's seen as a negative. Some people ferment it, some people pasteurise it, some people concentrate it to remove that excess moisture. In Southeast Asia as well, the honey there is seen as medicine. It's seen as a cure for diabetes, cure for cancer, cure for all sorts of different ailments. I was talking to a bloke who's probably online tonight from the Philippines, and he was saying that he uses the propolis, especially. He mixes it up in vodka to dissolve it. And he says it's a good cure for that that scabby stuff on the back of your dog. I think he meant mange. So if you are online tonight, hello to the Philippines. I think we've got a few people online from there, over in Western Australia and various other places as well. So hello to you all.
Great, thanks. So some of this work from overseas has influenced your book as well. What about your own scientific background? You're working as a scientist in a microbiological startup. Did that help? Did that background in microbiology? Well, tell us about the microbiology and the biochemistry of this honey.
Yeah, well, I have qualifications both in microbiology and biochemistry. Organic chemistry. I've worked in all those fields, worked in quality assurance, quality control, bioprocessing, fermentation. So a honey that ferments is actually quite interesting to me, and some of the, some of the sugar spectrums and stuff is interesting to me. The science course that I did at University of Western Sydney was actually a sister course to the food tech people, so I felt that I understood the food technology part of it. I can certainly do a flow process chart and I understand the microbes. So I think they're fascinating. I've actually gotten some of the scientific literature, and I can just sit there for hours and look at the appendices with the list of the organism names and just go, yeah, Zygosaccharomyces, you beauty. I love it.
So I think it's worth just explaining to the audience just what are the properties of honey and what might surprise them about the properties of our stingless bee honey. You mentioned that it's more watery. It's got a higher water content than honeybee honey. It's more liquid. But what other aspects of its biochemistry differ from honey? Significant ones in terms of some of the properties of our honey. I mean, there's a lot claimed about our honey. It's claimed to be a healthy honey. It's claimed to have antimicrobial properties. In some parts of the world, it's claimed to be pretty much a cure-all for anything you'd like to name. But is there any basis in that? Tell us a bit more about the scientific basis of some of these health claims that's made about our honey.
So one thing that I saw in the news that just came out last night was about some research from University of Queensland that's looking at a particular sugar that's in our honey. Now that sugar can be up to 25% in a honey like that. But this one's probably only got about 5% or so. The bees seem to be converting sucrose from natural sources in the nectar of flowers and using some sort of enzymatic process and actually changing it into a different sugar by the name of trehalose. Let's all say that 3 times quickly. Trehalose. So trehalose is an interesting sugar because it's not found much in nature. And for that reason, a lot of the microorganisms and so on out there they don't know how to handle it. They're not built to break it down. Even all those bacteria on your teeth that cause those teeth cavities when you have a nice sugary drink before bed, they don't get a handle on trehalose. So trehalose is a sugar that's not really going to cause tooth cavities. So that's interesting. It's also a anti-diabetic type of sugar in that the sugar level comes up in your bloodstream and it peaks and it stays there for a long time, many hours before it goes down. And it's also a powerful antioxidant. So all these are really interesting things. From the antimicrobial activity, there's been a lot of analysis, and that guy over there, he wrote a few papers on that, on the antimicrobial analysis. So these are all scientific analysis of the honey. So it really is, it is medicine. Yeah, it is medicine. But a lot of that medicine probably comes from, do we all know what that is? So that brown stuff there, yeah, that's the wax mixed with resin that they put their honey pots in. And that's the amount of wax that came with a jar of honey that big. And it's actually got all these antimicrobial properties in it. So people have been testing them against some of these, bacteria that are multiple antibiotic resistant, and it seems to kill most things. So that's really interesting. I didn't write a lot about that in the book, though. Yeah.
Right. No, I think it's an absolutely fascinating substance. It's such a rich, it's not just from the nectar of flowers, but it's also
Impregnated.
It's impregnated with some of the plant resins that the bees collect from the wild and make their honey pots out of, and then there's all these other microbes you get very excited about that are potentially changing the nature of the honey as well. Fantastic. So I think we've dived into the honey. That's been great. Thanks for that. Just returning to the book writing experience. So writing a book is an amazing achievement. Congratulations. It's your first book. So how did that go for you? How was the process of writing a book for you? Tell us your book writing adventure.
Yeah, so after it was no longer a pamphlet, for a while I called it a booklet. And I thought, yeah, it'll be a booklet. It won't be too big. But then it got larger. So I went, okay, so it's probably going to be a book. And about that, So it takes a long time. It takes lots and lots and lots of hours to write a book. And I didn't know that when I started. I ended up getting up at about, 4 o'clock each morning. Luckily for me, very lucky, I had a neighbour who got up early and went to work each morning. So every morning he'd get up, he'd rev the car, and I go, right, I'm up. So I'd have a shower and go to work, and I'd arrive there about 5 o'clock in the morning, and it's all dark. I found out even in our suburb, which is a very industrial sort of suburb, there's all these night birds flying around and walking around. It's really cool. So I get in there and I put the headphones on, and I'd either listen to 10 hours of rainstorms or I'd listen to heavy metal, Metallica, Master of Puppets. Great. Very good for the inventive process. I loved it. And I'd work for about 3 hours until it got to about 8 o'clock, and the sun's come up, and other people are starting to come in the office, and I'd down tools there. Sometimes I'd go through the day. Sometimes I'd get to the other end of that, and I'd put in another hour before I went home. But often I'd probably had enough by that stage. So writing a book, I didn't break it up into different bits. I just sort of did it all at once. I had a fair idea of the subjects that I wanted to cover. I wanted to focus on honey, and I started, talking to the various beekeepers and getting their their inputs and their sections, and that was okay. So I didn't have to prompt them too much. And then after a while, I met Glenbo. Would you like to stand up? Over here. After a while, I met Glenbo. Good mate of Tim's as well. Helped him write his book. Now, people that pick up my book, they go, "Wow, that's an amazing book. Look at the pictures. Look at the layout. Look at the format. That's an amazing book." That's all him. But he started talking to me. Yeah, give him a round of applause. Yeah. So that polishing stage then took about another 5 months.
8 months.
8 months. 8 months. Yeah, it took another 8 months. Try and get things better. Apparently, a lot of things that I did are lame. A lot of the photos I had were stupid or blurry. Blurry. Only a few of them stupid. And I went through so many times trying to find spelling mistakes and grammatical errors, and just bring a bit of love into the book, bring a bit of softness, these sorts of things. So great mentor over there with Glenbo. It's not all Glenbo. I've got to mention Tim here. Tim, during the early stages of the books, he's the guy that was whipping me there. He was putting me into touch with really good people that reviewed the book for me and made great suggestions. And Tim made great suggestions. So that's all part of the writing process as well. Yeah. Thanks, Bud.
No, thank you. I'll remember to thank your neighbour as well, your noisy early bird neighbour, for contributing to the book as well, and Metallica. So
Yeah.
Never knew. But did you go on any pilgrimages? So you're talking about these people, these beekeepers, and we mentioned them before, who have a great diversity of ideas, and they're very inventive and they're often very eccentric. So did you go on any journeys, interesting visits and journeys to meet up with these people who are very scattered, we should mention, all over Queensland? How was that experience?
Well, that was very good. Thank you, Tim.
No, you want more.
A bit more.
A lot of the places in the book I haven't actually journeyed to yet. I haven't been to Northern Territory, Arnhem Land, for example, which I'd really love to do. I'd love to go there, across into the Kimberleys and places like that. I have friends that have been to these places, so they're interesting to talk to. No, I'm a little bit closer to home. So mostly I've written about Carbonaria, Hocking's eye, and Australis. These are 3 different species of bee that we have here in southeast Queensland. I've got good mates in various places around, Ipswich and Brisbane and places like that. Go up as far as the Glasshouse Mountains. So I spoke to Anne Ross, Hive Haven there. Perhaps she's online tonight, just to see their processing conditions, get their input for the book as well. So that was great. Had a good mate by the name of Nick Powell, Native Bee Nick, they call him. And he took me out to see Alan Beale out in Tara, which is in Western Queensland. It's about 5 or 6 hours drive. And we went out there in a caravan a few years ago, so it wasn't specifically for the book, but that old mate sadly passed away now, by the way. That old mate made his impact on the book as well. I was speaking to my mate Nick and saying, geez, we should talk about Bealey, we should talk about Alan Beale. And if you give me a few of your ideas and I'll get a few of my ideas, a few of my recollections, and we should talk about him as well, because he was a real character. He was a real character and a real forebear in the native bees in Queensland and in Australia. And we went out in a caravan, as I said, and we stayed out there for about 4 days. And his place had about 500 or 600 beehives in it. He'd take us out into the bush. He had various places, there's all these different blockies, all these different small farms and stuff around Tara, and various places he could actually get bees. So he was getting bees out of trees all the time, putting them in boxes, and the honey that came out of those logs, it was rich and it was dark. It's like this one. And I really loved it. It tasted smoky. It tasted like old port wine. It tasted like berries. It was just really amazing stuff. And we get this honey out when we were looking for these bees and getting these bees out of these logs. He bought. Can I go on a bit more?
Please do.
He was such a good guy. Such a good guy. He bought a phone just to tape his bees. And we were sitting there once in his lounge room. And he had it up on the screen, and he had a guy from Miles that came down, Stumpy, and we're all looking at these things on the beehive on the screen of the TV, and he had been showing their mate Nick some woodwork because Nick was into woodwork, and the woodwork that he was showing was the butt of a rifle that was made out of a particular local tree that they had. So he was showing him the butt of the rifle, and before you knew it, a couple of hours later, the police arrived. Completely random checks of your gun cabinet. And he teased this young policeman like you wouldn't believe. And he's saying, well, show me your gun cabinet. He's going, yep. He's saying, unlock it. He's saying, yep. He's saying, but I can't, officer, because nobody's allowed to see where the key is. So you've got to turn around. Turn around, cover your eyes, and I'll get the key and unlock it. That's the sort of guy he was. So there's some real characters out there in the stingless bee world, out there in the bee world. They're a lot of fun.
You might be able to get away with that in Tara. I wouldn't like to try that. But no, it was very sad that Alan was taken prematurely from us. He was a real character. So yeah, and thanks for that description of some of the people. Just a bit more about the bees, though, Dean. Most of the audience will know that European honeybees, which is the source of nearly all the honey that we eat, is one species of bee, whereas with our native stingless bees, we've got a diversity of species, and they're all a bit different. In terms of keeping, they're different. In terms of where they occur, they're different. The honey they produce is different. Then when you go to other parts of the world, it's all different again. So just want to give us a quick, brief overview of the honey-producing species and their potential.
Yeah, sure. So we've got 12 different species at last count. There's probably more. I think some of the genetics will come out that there's more species in Australia. 12 different species of these native stingless bees. They all look rather similar. They're about 4 millimetres long. None of them can sting, so hence stingless bees. And they're part of this tribe of bees that you'll find throughout Asia and Europe, not Europe, Asia and tropical America and Africa as well. So anywhere that's tropical and hot, that's where they're found. So 12's not real many when you look at some of our neighbours in Southeast Asia where they'll have, how many would you reckon, Tim?
There's about 50 or 60 in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, it's quite a few. So some of our bees are similar to theirs and some of them are less similar. When you get over to South America, some of the bees are quite big. They're still stingless. They're still related, but they're starting to look quite different to ours. So we've got all these bees that look the same. 12 different species, as I said, and they're broken up into 2 different genuses in Australia, Ostroplebea tetragonula. So the tetragonulas, they're found mostly in the better watered parts of Australia where there's more honey, more reliable honey flows. Spring comes along, the flowers come out, the bees go, yes. So that's them. And those bees produce quite a lot of honey. Well, not compared to European bees where, you've got 100 litres or so. They make a litre, but I like it, so that's a lot. Whereas the Austroblavias, like the Austroblavia australis, they can be found over in coastal regions, but they're more likely to be found in the drier parts. And as we know, it doesn't always rain, and you don't always have flowers, and you don't always have these reliable honey flows. And those bees have got a different way of life. They've got a different rhythm. I particularly like their honey, but you don't get as much of it. When we were doing our research, and I did research as part of being with the honey committee for the AMBA, to FSANS, all those key names again. When we were doing the analysis on that, the question came up, should we just focus on the tetragonula, carbonaria, Hawkinsii, that'll do. I said, no, mate, no. We've got to take the australis through. We've got to take the australis through because the honey's so beautiful. And that's really why I've written the book. That's why I'm involved. I want to be able to share this honey with people in a respectful way, respectful of the bees, respectful of culture, respectful of environment, and that's where I want to get to.
Yeah, and that attitude of yours, then, that respect, that recognition, is really comes through in the book, and that's a lovely part of the book, I think. I think we're probably getting close to the end. Have I got time for one more question?
Yeah, one more.
So I'd like you to go on a little journey into the future in your own mind, Dean. And this is a very new thing. And what would you like? What would you like the end journey to be? If you could just imagine what a mature native stingless bee industry, if you want to call it, or activity, might look like in Australia into the future. This is off script too. I'm sorry.
Well, I think as we mature, then we're going to have to have better conditions for storing, labelling native bee honey. It can't just be any old stuff out of a tree, for example. By the way, don't cut down trees and take bees out of them. That's bad, I really don't support that sort of thing. Even if you come across a tree that's been cut down by, arborists and they've got bees in them, if they're happy in the log, try and keep them in the log. There's enough people out there with beehives now. Okay, but that's, I digress, sorry. So what would a mature industry look like? I think the mature industry will never look like the Australian honeybee industry, for example, in Australia. It's a lot smaller. We don't have as much honey. We don't have as many bees. They don't produce all that much. So I think that it's really going to be a niche product, something that people can enjoy because it is Australian, it's native Australian, and it does taste rather wonderful. But I don't think that a mature industry will ever be huge with huge volumes of honey. It's always going to be something that is rather special.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Dean. I think Chris is going to...
Yeah, we've got some questions, actually. So we have a question from online, from Combumeri Bee. I think that might be an alias. And Combumeri has said, what would your next experiments be about in the world of honey?
Thanks, Max. I know Combumeri. He's actually written one of the sections there from the Combumeri people down the southern end of the Gold Coast. And thank you for contributing to my book as well. My next experiments, I don't have any planned at the moment, sorry.
Okay, so nothing for the future, nothing, the book was it for now?
The book and actually getting the application into Food Standards Australia, New Zealand. So it's really been a journey with quite a focus on it. So that's where I've tried to get to. We actually did send some samples away for analysis in Germany and also in Melbourne. So we sent samples away for sugar spectrum analysis, all of the honey quality parameters. Down to Melbourne, we sent samples for food microbiology testing because although there have been a lot of scientific type studies like the antimicrobial stuff with Tim there that I mentioned before, here we're talking about food. And we didn't have all those food things actually underlined and understood. So the best place to get all these food testing type samples in is in a commercial food testing laboratory that is certified against others, and it just makes it all very, very stable, very standard. So happy to do that. Through the association, the Australian Native Bee Association, there was actually $5,000 done. So that all came into one page in the book. There's a little table. Well, it's about half the page. So $5,000, half a page. I think that's a good investment. But it's not for the book, it's for the standard, for the application, for the people of the association, for the beekeepers of the association, and to try and get that honey out to the public, out to consumers. So I just think that's wonderful that we've got this association, that we can work together in harmony and cooperation. So the experiments have been done.
Fantastic. Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, both of you, for the talk. Really keeping going Australian stingless bees, the hives now. I just wanted to ask you a question about the distribution. You say that in the warm tropical zones there are stingless bees. Have they managed to colonise the islands, like in the Pacific or in the Caribbean as well, or are they mainly big land masses? Because they're so small, I just wonder if they managed to fly and get into the islands.
They are on those islands. So some of those islands were actually linked during low sea level times during ice ages. You'll find stingless bees on the Solomon Islands, for example. There are stingless bees throughout some of the Caribbean islands and even up to Cuba. But we think because it's only a single species in Cuba, and the species is a type that was kept by the Native American Indian peoples of Mesoamerica, we think that those bees actually got to Cuba on a boat. So somebody took them there as part of their culture. New Zealand doesn't have any, and also it's too cold.
This is probably more of a comment, a question in it. When we first started being interested in native bees, I wasn't concerned about the honey because we just felt that they produced such a little bit, it would be stealing it. So our main thing was pollination, like regenerating Australia flora, and the regeneration through getting more stingless bees. But after listening to you tonight, it doesn't seem that it's cruel to take a little bit of honey. Could you comment on that?
So the question, just for the Zoom people who might not have heard that, was about whether it's cruel or not to take a little bit of honey from the stingless bees, or whether it's okay.
So taking honey from bees is always called robbing. You are stealing it, stealing or robbing. That's what you do to bees. So my comment is basically that in order to get honey and get honey sustainably from bees, you should have a large colony that you're not splitting, that you're not hurting. And you'll also see in my book that a lot of the things that I've written about and a lot of the beekeeper stories that I've tried to share, you can really look at those different beekeeper stories because a lot of them have this aversion to killing bees. And you do kill an odd one, and you'll kill an odd one in European beekeeping as well. So if you never want to kill a bee, then you don't want to take honey. But what you want to do is you want to keep those losses as low as possible. You want to be as kind to your bees as possible because for me, they're also my pets. They're my friends. I really like it. The honey in this jar, for example, I took the honey pots out. I gave it a shake. It came out in one layer, which is one of these techniques. I gave it a shake. I had 2 bees left when I went to actually extract that honey, and I thought that was pretty good. And with 2 bees, I didn't kill them either. Yeah, you want a nice strong colony. You don't want to take from them if there's no flowers around and that sort of thing. You want to look at the season that's there. You want to look at the honey that's coming back in, and don't take everything. Yeah.
Time for one more question. Yeah.
Because I assist the Aboriginal people from this area in Southeast Queensland, and what I really commend you for is your virtually Aboriginal custom reform in the Aboriginal community. They owned the honey. There's certain individuals actually owned it and always had to ask permission, and they weren't allowed to destroy it. To be very mindful of the holistic inclusion of those bees. And it was really interesting that Mount Coot-tha here is actually named after Kucha. And a lot of people are mispronouncing words in one word. But actually work with the traditional descendants of the Aboriginals who you'll find the actual blood descendants of the ancestors. Find a lot of really, really rich information. And I really would like to acknowledge the actual proper descendants in this area, which are the upper language. And the ones that I was talking about from country, there's no total here. That's been well now documented.
We've had quite a large fight on this back deck with a whole bunch of Aboriginal people over this issue once before, so it's quite tricky.
That have been acknowledged through the Federal Court of Australia. Those blood descendants are here in Brisbane. The unfortunate thing that's happened is the state only recognised which is the only state in Australia that does that. So that's why there's a lot of confusion about the actual true disease in this area. So I really commend you on the very respectful way in which you acknowledge your beings and look after them. I'm just curious on a couple of scientific areas. Have you just ever made mead out of it? And secondly, with the sugar, there's a couple of indigestible sugars that cause diarrhoea that don't go through your body. For example, the one that you're talking about actually gets ingested, and you're saying that diabetic properties. Sorry, that's a couple of.
Luckily for you, I investigated a story of diarrhoea from native bee honey. My way to do it was actually to get about that much and drink it all in one shot and see what happened. And I've covered that on my Dean Stuff Australian Native Bees Facebook site, so you can go and have a look at the results of that if you like. I also, as a control, used regular European bee honey, and I did that another night. Yeah, what we do for our honey. But getting back to your second point on respect, yeah, I've tried to be very respectful. for our Aboriginal people. And I've got Aboriginal ancestry too, by the way. That's why they come first in the book, rather than a trailing thought or, also. I've brought them up first.
Fantastic. I think we've come to the end of the time that we have allocated, but there's still more time for the people who are here in the room to be able to talk more, particularly at the signing table. I know you've got a bit of a show and tell kind of thing here. Can people just come and have a look at before we?
Yeah, I'll just describe it. So I've got a bit of a honey display here in some beautiful little jars. Everything from very pale honey. That one's actually an Australis. That's a bit of dirty carbonaria with a fair bit of pollen in it. I've got some dark Australis. I've got some carbonaria honey.
Dean, would you like to just mention the pouring rather than the spooning?
Oh, absolutely.
Those differences, is that because of a different gut or what they're collecting?
They'll be mostly different flowers that they're on. Different flowers, so different trees, different plants.
Have any of the bees got different guts?
I don't quite know what you mean.
Well,
the different species you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that will actually come out as difference in the colour. But the Ostracoplebea genus, about 6 species there compared to the Tetragonula. They've got a lot thicker honey. You can see that one's thick.
Well, that was that point
so that's like
where
the
different sugar with the
yeah, well, that one doesn't have that extra sugar so much.
Yeah.
That's not actually what's causing these honeys to have that different viscosity either. That sugar will be about the same as sucrose in a mixture. It'll look similar. It'll still be sticky. It'll still be a little bit thick. It really depends on the moisture content rather than the sugar. Yeah. Sorry, pouring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've mentioned pouring. So I like little bottles like this. I like these tiny little bottles. All throughout Asia, if you look at their bees, they've got them in bottles. They don't have them in jars. So I think it's a lot like maple syrup. So you're pouring it on your food. It keeps it pure, so it keeps the purity, which is good. I don't think that dirty spoons and, knives with butter on them and all those sorts of things actually give this honey credit. I think that it should be treated a lot like maple syrup. And I think that as we develop into a mature industry, then packaging and presentation and everything will make a big difference. I was listening to the radio and they were doing an experiment with the finest duck pate and dog food. And they presented them both as Michelin star sort of presentation with all the hors d'oeuvres and the sprinklings on the side and everything else. And they found that people could not tell the difference. They could not tell the difference. And that was due to presentation. It's not dog food. Anyone else?
I think we've run out of time for questions, but so thank you. I'd like to thank you tonight for that. That was really fascinating. And thanks, Tim, for doing such a great job with the questions. The book is amazing. If you want to see more of it, it's at the front counter. We are going to get Dean to his signing table first so that he can meet you there. If you have any more things you want to talk to him about, that's the place to do it. So thank you very much for tonight.
Thank you, everybody.
Let's get you out to your table and then we can
the drinks are on too.
come and join you. No, I don't think so. We get you through.
Sorry.